This is the Stages of the Soul podcast, a production of the Caritas Center. I'm Brian Dolan, and with me, here she is, Nancy Kane.
And here he is, Brian Dolan, and it's good to be together again.
And today we're going to talk about Lent, and immediately most people, what they think is, ooh, good, fish buffets on Fridays. Are you a fish fan? Do you like to eat fish?
I like to eat fish. I wouldn't say that I wake up in the morning going, what kind of fish can I make for dinner tonight? It's more of like, I think I probably should have fish. Or if I'm out, I think I probably should have salmon
Yeah.
because it's good for me. I think I probably think more I'm a red meat eater, but my cholesterol will probably tell me otherwise.
Now, is the baked or deep fried version more spiritual? Which one?
You know, it's one of those questions we could probably ponder for an hour, but I think it would go to the issues of the heart.
Yeah, because I don't know that it really, even though we've turned Lent into Friday fish fries and skipping things, like, you know what I'm giving up on this year for Lent? Lent. Or I'm giving up on, chocolate sauce on my ice cream.
Yeah.
People do things like that. Lent is really about something completely different. And I feel like I want to sound smart for a minute. So I'm going to say that from the recesses of my mind, my memory tells me that Lent began at the Council of Nicaea. Does that sound right?
Yes. Yes. You win the Jeopardy card here. Yes, that's
Good,
true.
because that's the end of my knowledge about it. Like, where was that? I'm assuming it was in Nicaea. Who was
Yeah.
there? Real important people.
Right.
And
The
somebody
leaders
was like, hey, guys, let's do Lent. All in favor? Aye.
Yeah, my hunch is that, and again, speaking from some level of ignorance, but some level of knowledge, is that there is an intentionality of. Well, let me back up. I think that prior to that council, there was the intentionality of encouraging the church to observe the 2 days before Easter Resurrection Sunday.
Hmm.
And at that council, there's a movement towards let's move this to 40 and fasting before that. Let's move this to a 40-day fast in commemoration of Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness. I would add to that, it's a preparation for our own wilderness journey as we look to and identifying with Christ in his journey, ending with the week of the Last Supper, Maundy Thursday, Holy Tuesday, and walking with Jesus to the cross.
Yeah, so much of that gets lost in the modern traditions of Lent. I always giggle about Fat Tuesday. It's a funny name, and it's like, ooh, before I deprive myself, let me just think of gluttony and participate in it as much as I can.
Let me gorge myself with a lot of donuts.
Yeah, and there's those. Is it a Polish thing? The punchkis or something is real big on
I
Fat
think that's
Tuesday or
my one
something.
culture. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but
But
nonetheless, that's not what it's about.
no, and I actually think that it moves more into observing it as a tradition than a religious practice. And what we are talking about today is Lent as a spiritual renewal and a spiritual practice that can lead us to becoming more formed to Christ's image as well as closer intimacy with him. And I think that to move it towards a joke about, obviously we're jesting about fish on Fridays or Fat Tuesday, it really minimizes the importance and the profound significance that this can have on our souls if we enter into it rightly.
And this is why, we're talking about Lent, and Lent has already begun when this episode is released.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay, because religion says, well, got to wait till next year. You missed Fat Tuesday. No,
Mm-hmm.
no. You don't have to do all 40 days. You could start any time in the midst of Lent, is my presumption.
Right, right. Because God's looking at the issues of the heart. And I think it's a matter of, am I willing to commit a period of time anticipating Easter, Resurrection Sunday, where I set aside and I'm intentional about thinking about what Christ has done for me, where I have missed the mark in my own life. What sins what things have I, attachments of the heart have I held on to that keep me really embracing more of Christ, whether it's busyness or materialism or social media, or, I mean, name whatever it is that we use to numb ourselves, looking at those seriously and saying, what do I really want?
Hmm.
What do I really desire? Because I think what we're hearing, just take social media, more and more research is coming out of how deadening it is to the soul. Um, and it doesn't move you towards Christ likeness. And so in Lent, we're asking ourselves those serious questions in light too of the practices of fasting, prayer, and the formal term is almsgiving, which is doing acts of charity for people in need.
And you mentioned all this is kind of is I don't know if emulating is the right word, but kind of emulating what Jesus did in his 40 days in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, why that in connection to Easter? Do you know, or is it just like just a period of fasting that we're focusing on?
Well, it's the wilderness of the soul, and it's the wilderness that Jesus experienced, and he did it for us first.
Hmm.
So he was, after he was baptized by John, the Spirit sent him into the wilderness, and he encountered all the things that we encounter here. You know, obviously not in the same way, but all the things that tempt us in our flesh, he was tempted in the wilderness. And so as we enter into the wilderness, we know he's identifying with us, but he's also showing us the way through. And that's where I think this is a really profound time. It's a heavy time because those spiritual practices of prayer and fasting alone um, kind of set us apart from our regular routine. Things that, you know, again, we use to comfort ourselves or to numb ourselves. And in this Lent time, we're saying, no, I'm not going to do that because I want eyes wide open. I want to see what I'm doing that's actually harmful for my soul and really grieves Christ's heart.
And isn't it? I mean, some people focus just on the deprivation portion of this, like, oh, it's social media, for example, that is really captivating my time and my attention and messing
Mm-hmm.
with my soul. So I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
stop that. But it's not just the stopping part, right? It's what you replace that with in the midst
Mm-hmm.
of your day when you're reaching for your phone or your computer and you're like, oh, I'm not doing that now. But
Mm-hmm.
then what? What are you doing with that time?
Well, and John Piper uses the expression, fasting is feasting on God. And so that
Oh,
whatever you take out, you put more in. So when you're not, when you would normally pick up your phone to run through Instagram posts and spend 15 minutes, you're, maybe you're even deleting Instagram app on your phone, and you're reminded, like, oh, now is a time where I can thank God for the beauty of this day, for a good night's sleep, for whatever it is that comes to mind, or interceding for this person, or interceding for the world. So you're putting into that space the things of the Spirit and the things of the kingdom.
now, what do you say to the person who's like, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of want to do something like this, but what's the measuring stick for what somebody should fast from? It doesn't have to be a full food fast. In fact, if you're going to do a dramatic fast, you have to see a physician first.
Hmm.
This could be something like you're mentioning social media, but how do we pick it? How do we know what to choose?
I think the question is to ask yourself, what do you do when you're stressed? So everybody has their go-to factor. It doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, but everybody has their thing that they do when they're stressed. Maybe it's again, maybe it's picking up their phone and going through Instagram. Maybe it's eating. Um, maybe it's going back over their calendar and or running through their email for the second time. Or, you know, there's something that all of us do that say, when I do these things for a moment, I feel a little bit better, but I don't. It doesn't ever really do anything for me. Shopping, internet surfing. Um, some people watch the news, but it moves you away from this present moment into another space and time that's not eternal. And everything, eternity is right now, here and now. The present moment is what's God invites us to. And so when we fast, we're taking out those things that keep us from, again, back to the expression eyes wide open, to staying in the here and now, being more clearly aware of what's going on for me, as well as being attentive to how God's moving in my life and in the world. And so I
So
often, Go ahead.
Well, so those moments could be even as simple as reflective in a Christ focused way, like where you're just, what is God doing in my life at the moment? Where
Hmm.
can I see Christ at work in my life when you're
Hmm.
when you're not surfing the web or whatever?
Hmm. Yeah. And I remember, I don't know if it was spring or summer, but I remember sitting on our porch and just enjoying the weather. The sun was shining, plants were in bloom, and a dragonfly came up and like hovered right in front of my face.
Whoa.
And then it took off. They like dart away, and then it came back again and hovered in front of my face, and then it took off again. And I look back on that, and I looked online, and supposedly one of the symbols of spiritual formation is dragonflies. So I'm like,
Oh,
okay,
interesting.
yeah, God was speaking to me. It's the work that we do, and that's a cool reminder. But I thought, had I been on my phone that whole time, looking down and scrolling through, that dragonfly could have come up 50 times, and I would have never seen it. And I think that's the what we're talking about here is that we run the risk of missing these magnificent eternal moments when our eyes are closed. Or, I think another important consideration for some people, we might numb ourselves by reading a lot of scripture. You know,
You're making somebody uncomfortable with that.
because I think we can be like taking more and more information in, reading, 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 reading. But again, we're never really encountering Christ's presence here and now that says, I see you, I know you, I'm inviting you to see me and to know me.
Well, and that's where I think somebody could hear your little story about a dragonfly and go, it feels mystical.
Hmm.
I don't know if I like that, Nancy. I think I should just read my Bible more. What do you say to the person who's worried about you noticing the dragonfly as being some sort of new agey mystical experience?
I think Jesus was a mystic.
Okay, you
Look,
have to
read the
explain
Sermon
that.
on, what's that?
You have to explain that.
Read the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, he's using all kinds of things around him to point to larger kingdom realities. Read the whole scriptures. Like I was studying last night, the fig tree, he curses the fig tree. Well, that's kind of mystical because the disciples were like, and it's in different places in scripture, so you have to pull it all together. But the first time around, they're kind of like, what was Jesus doing? Because they're looking at us like he's talking about a fig tree. Okay, we're looking on the Sermon on the Mount. He goes, consider the lilies of the field. That's he's taking something that's in the creation and moving it to a larger reality. And I think that's the core of Christian mysticism is this sense of how can I see through Christ's eyes to see the eternal moment happening here and now and not get lost into a chair is just a chair is a chair. The materialism that is part of a finite culture.
Yeah, and you kind of, I wouldn't say you introduced this to me, but you've familiarized this for me. And because I remember growing up in an environment, and in various parts of my 20s, it's a very kind of legalistic evangelical environments where, it's really about God's word and anything else is probably dangerous and mystical.
Hmm.
Uh, but it opens up a whole new aspect to me of connecting with Christ when you really do fully acknowledge that the creation is a reflection of the creator. It's an
Hmm.
intellectual thing that I think any evangelical or mainline Protestant or Roman Catholic could look at and go, yeah, okay, yeah, that's true. That's Romans 1.
Hmm.
And if the creation is a reflection of the creator, why couldn't something in creation remind me of a characteristic of the Lord or remind me of who he is or that he's there with me or he's beautiful? All these things. Why couldn't it do that? Well, no, it should do that. And
Hmm.
it opens up a whole new world, I think, for the person who's got their nose in a Bible, like you say. Maybe too much. It sounds weird
Hmm.
to a Christian to hear that. Too much in my Bible. What do you mean? Well, yeah, if you're doing the Bible in a year and you're getting stressed out about it, but you're not looking up to see the stars that night or notice the dragonfly that's hovering in front of your face, I think you're missing out.
Well, exactly. And I think, a good example is the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've, in my, short span of knowledge about it, but I've ever read anybody just analyze it like, well, I don't know that that was all that well done, and I don't know about his style, and no, it's usually about this awe factor of the brilliance and the
Yeah.
beauty, and you're pulled into aspects of the character of God and creation and Adam and Eve and how they're portrayed, and there's something in the imagery of all that that pulls you up and out of yourself to this larger reality. And I think that Robert Barron has said that beauty is the new evangelization, and I would say beauty and truth is the new evangelization. Is as I think that people um, we're living in a time where we're flooded with so much stuff, but I think when people see something quite beautiful, there's something in that moment that's going to lift them up out of the mire of this world that we're living in, to see that there's something more.
Oh yeah, I can catch myself for days at a time not really looking up. I'm looking down where my feet are walking. I'm looking at the steering wheel, the road. I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
at the computer screen in front of me, but pausing to go, in the fall to go like, whoa, look at these trees. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Or I,
Mm-hmm.
I live out in the country where there isn't much light pollution. And just to take a minute and look up and go, look at that. You can see all these stars. It really, I think it's a game changer. And for some people in the midst of Lent, perhaps what they're going to replace, whatever that is, social media, or I don't know, whatever it is that their bad eating habits, maybe replace it with just an open heart to the Lord, experiencing something in nature, going on a hike or sitting on a
Mm-hmm.
park bench.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be a powerful exercise.
Yeah, and I think two illustrations to that come to mind. One is um, The Life of the Beloved by Henry Nouwen. No, Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen. And that book was written on his notes as he was in a difficult time, spiritual darkness in his own life. And he went to the museum in Germany that had the original Return of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt. And he was so taken by his first observation, because I guess it's quite huge, and kept coming back every day. Eventually, one of the guards just gave him a stool to sit in, and he would just look at all the details and recount the story, and then look at the visuals and then recount the story. And then from that became this, I really think, a profound um, view of the truth of that parable, but it was manifested through the story. And I think that that's where we way undermine the whole notion of what beauty can do. What it can lift us up and out of ourselves. Um, and in my own personal life, I there was a period of time where I finished the school year, and with most college school years, most professors get to the end in spring and they're all burned out, as well as the students are too.
Yeah.
Um, but there's one year in particular that I was particularly burned out, and I went to see my spiritual director, and he identified that with me of just how tired I seemed. And I said, I don't even, when I pray, nothing happens. Like I'm just spent. Like there's nothing going on for me. And it feels like this blank slate of nothingness. And he said, what I would like you to do is go find a church with a cross at the very front, a crucifix, Christ on the cross. And he said, just sit there. And I said, what do you mean? He said, just sit there. And he said, I want you to see Jesus looking at you and you looking at Jesus. And I thought, all right. But I was so burned out, I was willing to try anything. And so I found a church nearby our house. And every day for about 2 hours every morning, I would go there and I would sit in this uh, just really beautiful church and look up to this powerful crucifix of Christ on the cross. And I would just stare. And the first few days, I couldn't even say anything. I would just stare. I was like, okay, I'm here. I'm showing up, God. I see you, you see me, okay, but nothing would happen. And then what started to happen is when I would go, I'd start to cry.
Hmm.
And what was happening is there was this movement of being aware that Christ was actually seeing me in my fatigue, in my weariness, and that moving something deep in my, that I couldn't put words to. Like if you asked me back then what was happening, I couldn't describe other than something beyond my awareness was happening. And I kept that up for about 6 weeks. And by the end of that 6 weeks, there was life that was coming back in me. Now you could call it mystical. You could call it as simple as I was sitting in the presence of Christ, and the visual of his cross was reminding me of his presence with me. You know, that it wasn't the cross itself; it was the visual of the cross that was reminding me that Christ was with me. He was for me, and he was restoring something in me that was lost along the way by my own choices, by who knows, organization's choices. But I was just tired. And even now, I go back to that of how important that was, just to be with him and he with me. And because I was so tired, I couldn't even put, like I said earlier, I couldn't put words to it. I couldn't make something happen. And sure enough, Father Sears was right, is that I just needed to be with Jesus.
It's a beautiful story. To me, when I hear that, I'm thinking a couple of things. One of them is, so often when you hear someone talk about Lent, it becomes this, like, what do I have to give up? Okay, now how am I going to do this? It becomes a very pragmatic, like, all right, let's do this thing. When to me, a way to practice Lent could be exactly what you did.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
You could,
mm-hmm.
somebody could just simply go to a beautiful church building and look at a cross for, and you said 2 hours. How about 20 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
And do that
Mm-hmm.
every day and think about Christ in the midst of it. And that could be Lent. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that and I think it's the attitude of the heart. I think Lent begins even at the beginning of why am I doing this? Like, what do I want? And if it's a labor, if it's like, oh, I should do this, like everybody says I'm supposed to. Well, if I approached my marriage that way, it would have lasted about a week,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but it's rekindling our first love with Christ during Lent.
It's that
He was
simple.
Yeah, it's that simple, that he was our first love before all other loves. He loved us into our mother's womb. He's been there staring at us and gazing upon us in our deepest moments of joy and sorrow. And so it's returning to that first love to say, remind me again who you are. Remind me again, I've lost my way. I'm in the wilderness and I'm tossed to and fro by all my ways to try to make sense of my life. Remind me again that you are really good and you are really for me. And that you've walked this path that I'm on before me, and you're going to show me the way through.
And that sounds so much more freeing than, okay, every day I'm not going to have breakfast. I'll be really hungry, kind of cranky. Make sure I don't do it. And then I'm going to plan, it's such a different experience. I think it's supposed to be that way. So,
And I think with what I'm suggesting, then you're not easily talking about Lent. I remember a colleague of mine during Lent butted in line. I was in the food line for the place where all the faculty were eating at that point. And she butted in line behind me and she's like, oh, excuse me. I have to get in because I'm in Lent and I've been fasting and now I have some blood sugar issues and I just need a little ice cream but she was announcing to everybody around her what she was doing. And I thought, if I didn't know anything about Lent, I'd think, sister, why are you doing this? Like,
especially if
you
you
know,
have blood sugar issues, that doesn't sound wise.
right. But I think it's like when you have a very tender conversation with a friend, there's nothing in you that wants to run and tell five other people that vulnerable moment. You just want to cherish it.
Yeah.
You hold it as special and, um, yeah, special. And so you're not going to be quickly picking up the phone going, oh, yeah, and then, this happened, that happened. It's much more of this tender encounter that I think God is inviting us into with Lent.
And you mentioned there's, I think it's three pillars of Lent. I don't know if you characterized it that way, but I know some materials we have say that fasting, prayer, and giving. Somebody might be surprised to hear giving is something you do in Lent. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
ooh, do I get presents? Do you
Mm-hmm.
exchange presents? No, I don't think that's what the point is. So, what? Help me
Hmm.
understand that one.
So God's heart is, he loves us all, but his heart is inclined to the poor. Now that can take a lot of forms and shapes. And the poor can be seeing the homeless come to the shelter in our neighborhood, or the pads, the overnight shelter. It can also be, um, I'm trying to think of stuff in my environment. My neighbor who is mentally ill, who has severe OCD, and doing something kind for her. It can be, maybe it can be my spouse. It can be, but where are the poor around you that God's saying, I love these people. I want you to love them on my behalf. And as he says in scripture, when you've done this for the least of these, my brother, you've done these for me. And I think it's a very wise thing that the early church put into place to have this as the third pillar, because if you're just fasting and praying, you can run the temptation of becoming ingrown. So you're just in this internal world of how am I feeling, what's going on, examination of soul, all good things, but you always want to have a balance. And so what's going on here always must lead us to a greater life of love, of kindness, of compassion, of mercy. And if that's not happening, then you've moved into an unhealthy spirituality.
And yet, I can see how quickly this could drift into a ritual for someone, right? Where they're like, okay, so I'm going to get up and I'm going to deprive myself of something, and then I'm going to pray, and then tonight I'm going to do the thing that I give
Mm-hmm.
to people.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like it's much more open and free, and maybe you're primarily focused on fasting from whatever this thing is, and maybe you're doing what we talked about. You're going to a church and you're looking at a cross and just contemplating, or a beautiful painting, and you're praying. But maybe at the end of the week, you're like, you know what? I'm really focused today. I'm gonna maybe help at the soup kitchen, or I'm gonna give to my
Mm-hmm.
spouse. It sounds to me like it's more of that ebb and flow as opposed to a follow the rules. Am I interpreting this correctly?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think to be surprised, God knows our hearts. And if we're earnest to follow him in this way, he provides the doors. The people will be there. I think of a woman that I work with, and we were talking about her having more reaching out to people in need in her life. And she tried different options, and nothing really opened up. She tried nursing homes, and again, the things weren't falling into place. And then over time, I think what she realized is her husband was the poor person. Her
Poor in what
husband was,
way?
in terms of she had not attended to him in ways that she had, and I'm going to put this gingerly, but she had been more harsh or dutiful with him, and overrode his needs many times
Hmm.
for the sake of her own comfort, for just a pattern they developed. And that when she turned towards him, she began to see how much she had dismissed him.
Hmm.
And so he really was the poor person in her midst that she was walking along. She was walking away from, or ignoring. And I think that God wants us to love people in the poor. So if we ask him, show us where the poor are, he will show us. And it can be as simple as you're at Target, and you greet the cashier and you tell her how beautiful her eyes are, and she goes, "You've made my day." That I think that's because a lot of us are poor now. A
Hmm.
lot of people are stressed out. A lot of people are lonely. A lot of people are working more than what they can handle. And so I think it's not going to look as obvious as a homeless person with a bag. It might be much more hidden, but they're there.
And see, the way you're describing this is so refreshing. I can imagine someone listening feeling the same way, because it's
Mm.
so easy to drift into ritual.
Hmm.
Why does our heart bend towards that?
I think because we don't know love. I really do. I think that it's been a temptation in my own life that I was thinking about this the other day, is This somehow, if I get this right, then God's going to be really pleased.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
if I just get the right devotional that I'm really faithful to follow through, you know, I'm going to be just clicking along with Christ, and He's going to be so pleased, and it's going to be so wonderful. And that's not love. That's performance.
Hmm.
That's me trying to figure it out. But that verse in Psalm 23, surely goodness and mercy will follow me, or in the Greek, it's run after me all the days of my life, is actually what's true. Is that God is running after us with His love and His mercy. His mercy saying, you don't deserve this, but look at the palms of my hand and the scar on my side. This is what love looks like. Now, I think the hardest part is, will we receive it? Because everything, like you're saying, I think the human tendency is to say, what do I need to do to kind of figure this out?
Yeah, and then to your point as well, I could help that homeless guy right there, or I think God would be a little happier if I went to the soup kitchen and helped 5 homeless people. So let's
Mm-hmm.
just see what's going to make God the happiest. That's what I'm going to do. So
Mm-hmm.
deconstruct that. Why is that attitude wrong? Like which will make God happiest?
Because I think that it takes our culture's norms and puts it onto our spiritual norms. Our culture says, if you have a little money, that's okay. But if you have a lot of money, that's okay. If you're a manager, that's good. But if you're vice president, that's even better. Or if you're the president, that's even better. If you
Yeah.
have a college education, well, that's good. But if you have a master's, now that's better. So you see, it's that constant thinking of, there's something more out there that if you realize it, it's an ego thing, then you're going to really be it. When in fact, Jesus's norms throws that all out and says, what? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Well, how can that be in context with what we're talking about?
Yeah, God's economy is so different. Even seen in He's going, look, you guys, yeah, you didn't kill somebody, but you hated them in your heart, and I see those as the same.
Mm-hmm.
God's
Mm-hmm.
economy turns ours upside down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
But see, we're so unwilling to go there because it gives us a sense of control to say, well, see, I've just added another devotional book to my morning routine, and that's what's just really helpful. When in fact, the harder way is to say, I screwed up so many times yesterday. I'm just surprised that God still wants to hear me.
hmm.
Or I'm so aware of how callous I can be towards other people. And yet, Christ still says to me over and over again, welcome home, we can start again. That's really the harder way.
It is the harder way, and it to me it points back to the heart of where we should be in Lent. Yeah,
That's
remembering
exactly what we
that.
should use. Yeah. That in some senses, God's doing His good and eternal purpose in us when that's the fruit of what's coming forward. Not in I want to put a caveat on here, not in oh, here's the things, and I did this and I did this, and then, oh, and then I don't, and then I have, I can tell you how bad I am. Do you hear? That's more of like a self-engrossed beating up. But this is more of as I look into the face of love and He shows me myself, oh my gosh, I'm aware of how much I'm loved, and I'm aware of how broken I am. And there's a gentle mercy with that, because I'm being pulled out to see the face of love. I'm not staying in this shopping list of all my faults. I'm being pulled out into a face of love that says, I love you as I love you as I love you. And you're not where you need to be yet. This has got to go. This callousness or this pride or this lack of mercy. I want you to release that.
The Stages of the Soul podcast has been a production of the Caritas Center for Christian Formation in partnership with Stained Glass Media. Don't forget to subscribe to, rate, and review this podcast to help us spread the word. Nancy Kane is a licensed professional clinical counselor, retired professor, author, and speaker, Brian Dolan is a radio host, podcaster, and former public school teacher. Be sure to check out the Caritas Center's Spiritual Formation Program, as well as more information about this podcast at thecaritascenter.com. That's thecaritascenter.com. And last, but certainly not least, special thanks to the man, the myth, and the legend, Ray Kane, for his guidance, support, and expertise. Talk to you next time.
This is a Stained Glass Media production.